In feudal Japan, a debt of honor is never paid with silver. When this man agreed to repay what he owed, he believed it would cost him only his pride. He was wrong. By the time the debt was called in, blood had already been chosen as the currency. Before the story begins, comment the name of the city you are watching from. And if you want more dark samurai tales about honor, betrayal, and impossible choices, subscribe to the channel. The letter arrived on the first morning of winter, carried by a boy who wouldn't meet his eyes. Katsuro took it with hands that had forgotten how to tremble, but the paper felt heavier than any sword he'd ever lifted. The seal was old, pressed in wax, the color of dried blood. He recognized it immediately. 15 years had passed, but some marks never fade from memory. He dismissed the boy with a coin and stood in the doorway of his small house, watching snow settle on the bare branches of the persimmon tree his wife had planted 3 summers ago. The tree had never borne fruit. She said it would eventually. She said many things would come with time and patience. Katsuro broke the seal. The message was brief. 3 lines in elegant script that seemed to mock him with their simplicity. The time has come to honor your word. Present yourself at the Tsukimori estate before the next full moon. Come alone or do not come at all. There was no signature. None was needed. He burned the letter in the cooking fire and told his wife he would be traveling north for a few days. She asked if it was dangerous. He said no, which was the first lie. She asked if he would return, and he said, of course, which might have been the second. Her face told him she understood what his words would not say. They had been married long enough for silence to carry more truth than speech. That night, he lay awake, listening to her breathe beside him. Their daughter slept in the next room, 7 years old and still young enough to believe her father was a simple farmer who'd once been a soldier. She didn't know what kind of soldier. She didn't know about the years before the farm, before the quiet life, before he'd tried to bury his name under soil in seasons. The Tsukimori estate sat in the mountains, 3 days' walk from anywhere that mattered. Katsuro had been there once, a lifetime ago, when he was someone else. When he carried 2 swords and a name that meant something to men who valued such things. He'd been 23 then, arrogant with skill and empty of wisdom. He'd made promises the way young men do, believing words were cheap and the future was infinite. Lord Tsukimori had been different then too, a man in his prime, sharp as winter wind, with eyes that seemed to measure the weight of your soul against the weight of your ambition. He'd offer Katsuro a choice when no choice seemed to exist. He'd provided a way out when every path led to death or dishonor. The price had seemed reasonable at the time. A favor owed, a debt acknowledged, a promise to answer when called. 15 years of silence had made Katsuro hope the debt had been forgotten. Hope was a luxury he should have known better than to afford. He left before dawn. While his wife pretended to sleep and his daughter's breathing remained soft and unknowing in the next room, he took his tanto, the short blade every man carried, but left his katana wrapped in oiled cloth beneath the floorboards where it had rested for a decade. Whatever this debt required, he told himself, it wouldn't need a samurai's sword. He was a farmer now. Farmers carried tools, not weapons. The road north was empty this time of year. Snow had closed the higher passes, and only fools or desperate men traveled when winter pressed its weight against the mountains. Katsuro supposed he qualified as both. On the second day, he passed through a village he didn't recognize. The people there moved with the careful stillness of those who've learned that attention brings trouble. An old woman selling dried fish watched him with eyes that had seen too much. When he asked about the road to Tsukimori lands, she spat in the dirt and turned away without answering. He found his answer anyway. The road climbed into pine forests where snow muffled sound and the air tasted of iron and ice. By the 3rd afternoon, he stood before gates he'd walked through as a younger man wearing a younger face. The estate had changed. The walls were higher now, reinforced with stone that spoke of sieges survived or expected. Guard towers rose at intervals, manned by soldiers who watched his approach with the blank efficiency of men who killed for wages and slept soundly after. The gardens he remembered, once carefully tended, had been replaced by training grounds where ronin practiced kata in the fading light. A steward met him at the inner gate. The man's face was a careful mask of courtesy that revealed nothing and promised less. He led Katsuro through courtyards, where armed men stood in clusters, through corridors where servants moved with downcast eyes, into the heart of an estate that felt more like a fortress preparing for war. Lord Tsukimori received him in a room that overlooked the valley below. The man had aged, but not weakened. His hair had gone white, but his back remained straight. His hands were but they rested on his knees with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted their right to command. Katsuro knelt and bowed. The formality felt strange after so many years of informal life, but the body remembered what the mind wished to forget. "You came," Tsukimori said. "Not a question. A confirmation of expectation. I gave my word. Many men give their word. Fewer remember it after 15 years of comfort and distance." The Lord's voice carried no judgment, just observation. "Your farm prospers, I'm told. A wife, a daughter, a quiet life, far from the complications of honor and duty." Katsuro said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like excuse or justification. "Do you remember what you owed me?" Tsukimori asked. A life debt. You sheltered me when Lord Akiyama's men would have killed me for refusing to participate in the massacre at Shimizu. You hid me for 3 months while they searched. You provided papers and passage when they finally stopped looking. You asked only that I remember. An answer if you called a simple transaction," Tsukimori said. "Your life preserved, my favor acknowledged. And now the accounting comes due." The old lord stood and moved to the window. Snow was beginning to fall again, heavy flakes that would bury the valley by morning. "I am dying," he said, without turning. "The physicians give me perhaps 2 seasons, perhaps less. I have no sons. My brother's son, Kazuki, will inherit these lands and the responsibilities that come with them. He is young, ambitious. He believes strength is measured in steel and territory. He does not understand that power is more often found in patience and perception." The shape of the debt was forming, but its full outline remained hidden. "There is a man," Tsukimori continued, "Hiroaki of the Minamoto clan. 20 years ago, his father and I made certain agreements. Borders were established. Resources were divided. Peace was maintained through mutual respect and fear. Hiroaki does not respect these agreements. He believes my age makes me weak. He believes my impending death makes these lands vulnerable. He has been testing our borders, taking what was never his, preparing for a war he thinks he's already won." The Lord turned from the window. His eyes held something Katsuro couldn't name. Regret, perhaps, or calculation wearing regret's mask. "My nephew will inherit a war he cannot win. Not because he lacks courage or skill, but because Hiroaki has been patient and thorough. He has bought loyalties, planted spies, secured alliances. When I die, Kazuki will have perhaps 3 months before everything collapses. Unless," the word hung in the air like a blade suspended above a neck, "unless," Katsuro asked, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer, "unless Hiroaki dies before I do." Not in Beto, where his death would rally his clan to vengeance. Not by assassination, which would make him a martyr and justify the war he wants, but by challenge, by single combat. A matter of personal honor that his clan cannot dispute or avenge without appearing weak. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the air thinner. "You want me to kill him?" "I want you to honor your debt," Tsukimori said. "You are one of the finest swordsmen of your generation. I've heard you no longer carry a katana, but skill like yours doesn't vanish with disuse. It waits, like honor waits, like debts wait." Katsuro's hands had begun to shake. He pressed them against his thighs, willing steadiness that wouldn't come. "I haven't held a sword in 10 years. I'm a farmer now. I have a family. Yes, a family made possible by the life I preserve. A farm worked by hands that would have rotted in an unmarked grave if not for my intervention. Your daughter draws breath because I allowed you to disappear when powerful men wanted you dead. That is the weight of what you owe." The old lord moved closer, and Katsuro saw something in his face that was worse than cruelty necessity. The cold mathematics of survival that reduced lives to numbers and deaths to strategies. "I'm not asking you to become a killer again," Tsukimori said. "I'm asking you to honor the promise you made. One death. One man who deserves what's coming to him. One action that prevents a war and saves hundreds of lives that would be lost in the fighting. Is that not a fair price for the years of peace you've enjoyed?" Katsuro wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he'd left that life behind, that he'd buried the man who killed without question, that he had a daughter who deserved a father who came home with soil under his nails instead of blood. But the words died before they reached his tongue, because Tsukimori was right. The debt was real. The life he'd built existed only because this man had chosen mercy when justice demanded his death. How? He asked, and heard his voice come from very far away. Hiroaki trains every morning at dawn, alone. He's proud of his skill and contemptuous of protection. You'll challenge him in the formal manner. He cannot refuse without losing face. You'll fight, you'll win. You'll return here, and the debt will be settled. You'll go back to your farm and your family, and we'll never speak again. And if I refuse, Tsukimori's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something that made Katsuro understand that refusal had never actually been an option. Then I'll be forced to wonder, the Lord said softly, how Lord Akiyama's surviving retainers might react to learning that the man who shamed their master by refusing his orders still lives, quietly, peacefully, with a wife and daughter in a small farmhouse 3 days' walk from Eri. The threat was delivered without heat or emphasis, a simple statement of consequence, cause and effect. The machinery of honor, turning slowly, grinding whatever stood in its path. Katsuro felt something break inside him, something that had held him upright for 15 years. He heard himself say yes, and watched Tsukimori nod, as if the answer had never been in doubt. They gave him a room. They brought him food he couldn't eat. A steward arrived with his old katana, cleaned and sharpened and ready. Katsuro stared at the blade for hours, remembering the weight of it, the balance, the way it felt to be the kind of man who carried such a thing without hesitation. That night, he dreamed of his daughter. She was calling for him, but he couldn't reach her. Every path he took led deeper into darkness, and her voice grew fainter with each step. He woke before dawn and found the sword waiting beside him like an old friend who'd never forgotten his face. The steward appeared as gray light began to seep through the shutters. He carried formal clothing, darhak, a plain haori without clan markings, the clothes of a ronin, masterless and free to issue challenge without political consequence. Lord Tsukimori reminds you, the steward said, that Hiroaki is expecting this. Not you specifically, but someone. He's been too bold too long to believe there would be no response. He'll fight seriously. He'll try to kill you. This isn't theater. Katsuro dressed in silence. The clothes fit as if they'd been made for him, which they probably had been. Tsukimori was thorough. Men who survived as long as he had understood the importance of details. They rode out in the pre-dawn cold, 4 of them. Katsuro the steward, and 2 guards who said nothing and watched everything. The Minamata estate was half a day's ride east, across a valley where morning mist pooled like spilled milk. They stopped Eri from the gates. The steward handed him a scroll containing the formal challenge. The words were precisely kept. Hiroaki had dishonored agreements made by his father. He had violated borders established through mutual accord. He had acted without respect for tradition or consequence. Justice demanded satisfaction single combat. Dawn tomorrow. A matter between warriors, not clans. He'll accept, the steward said. His pride won't allow otherwise. Present this to his gate guards. They'll convey it to him. You'll wait at the shrine 1 ri north of his estate. He'll come at dawn. Katsuro took the scroll. His hands were steady now. Something had changed inside him during the night. The farmer had receded. The man underneath, the one he'd tried to bury, was surfacing like a body rising from deep water. What if I lose? Jai asked. The steward's expression flickered. Something like pity, quickly masked. Then Lord Tsukimori will find another way, and your family will be provided for. He's not cruel. Just they left him at the shrine. It was old, half-collapsed, dedicated to a god whose name had been worn away by weather and forgetting. Katsuro sat among the ruins and tried to remember the last time he'd killed a man, Shimizu, 12 years ago. A young samurai who'd been guarding refugees, Katsuro was helping escape. The boy had been barely 17, frightened and dutiful. Katsuro had killed him quickly, efficiently, without malice or hesitation. He'd told himself it was necessary, that the refugees' lives mattered more than the guards' loyalty. He'd told himself many things, and believed none of them when he woke screaming 3 nights later. That was the last time he'd drawn a blade in anger. That was what had driven him to refuse Lord Akiyama's orders for the massacre. That was what had made him run, and keep running, until Tsukimori had offered shelter and a chance to become someone else. Now he was being asked to become that man again. Just once more, one death to balance the scales. One life taken to preserve the peace that protected hundreds of others. The mathematics were simple. The morality was not. He spent the afternoon practicing kata with his sword. The movements returned slowly, muscle memory overcoming rust and hesitation. His body was older now, slower, but the technique remained. Cut, block, thrust, pivot. The dance of violence performed in silence, among ruins where men had once come to pray for mercy. Night fell. He didn't sleep. He sat with his back against cold stone and watched stars wheel overhead. Ancient and indifferent to human concerns about honor and debt and the price of survival, dawn arrived, painted in shades of ash and rose. Katsuro stood and drew his sword, checking the edge one final time. The blade caught the light and threw it back sharp enough to cut shadow. Hiroaki arrived with the sun. Here he came alone as tradition demanded, riding a black horse and wearing armor that had seen use and care. He was younger than Katsuro expected, perhaps 30, leaning hard with the confidence of a man who'd won more fights than he'd lost and expected that pattern to continue indefinitely. They dismounted. They bowed. The formality of it all felt obscene somehow. This careful respect paid before they tried to kill each other. "I don't know you," Hiroaki said. His voice was level, curious, without being concerned. "But your challenge on behalf of Tsukimori, that tells me everything I need to know. You're a tool, a weapon pointed by a dying man who fears what comes after his death. Challenge because you broke faith with agreements that maintained peace," Katsuro said. The words felt hollow, rehearsed, because they were, "What I am doesn't matter. What you've done does." Hiroaki smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Tsukimori's dying. His heir is weak. These lands will belong to my clan within a year, whether you kill me or not. He sent you to accomplish nothing except your own death. Does that not make you angry, being used so carelessly?" Katsuro didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm what they both already knew. They drew their swords. The fight was not elegant. It was not beautiful. It was fast and brutal and terrifyingly serious. Hiroaki was good, better than good. His blade moving with practiced economy and lethal precision. He pressed hard immediately, testing Katsuro's defense, looking for weakness or hesitation. Katsuro gave ground, parrying, blocking, his arms screaming at the impact of steel on steel. 15 years of farming had built different muscles than sword work required. His shoulders burned, his wrists ached, but the technique was still there, very deep, responding to threat the way it had been trained to respond. They broke apart, circled, came together again. Hiroaki cut high. Katsuro ducked and thrust low. The younger man twisted, avoided the blade by a finger's width, countered with a strike that would have opened Katsuro from shoulder to hip if it had connected. It didn't. Katsuro spun left, brought his sword up in a rising cut that Hiroaki barely blocked. The clash of blades echoed across the empty valley. No audience, no witnesses, just two men trying to kill each other while the sun climbed higher and morning birds sang in trees that didn't care about human violence. Katsuro felt it happening. The shift, the old instincts overriding thought, his body moving before his mind could question or hesitate. He'd forgotten this feeling. The terrible clarity of combat, the way time stretched and compressed, the reduction of existence to breath and movement, and the space between heartbeats. Hiroaki lunged. Katsuro sidestepped and cut. The blade caught the younger man's arm, opened a line of red across his forearm. First blood, Hiroaki's expression changed. Surprise, then respect, then calculation. They fought harder, faster, no more testing, no more caution. Just skill and will and the brutal honesty of violence. Katsuro felt his strength failing. His arms were lead. His lungs burned. Hiroaki sensed it, pressed his advantage, drove forward with combinations that forced Katsuro back toward the shrine's ruins. Then Hiroaki overextended just slightly. Just enough. Katsuro saw the opening and took it without thought. He stepped inside the younger man's guard, turned his blade, and thrust upward beneath the ribcage. The sword entered cleanly, angled toward the heart. Hiroaki's eyes went wide. His sword fell from nerveless fingers. He made a sound that wasn't quite words, more surprise than pain. Katsuro withdrew the blade. Hiroaki collapsed, knelt, fell forward onto his face in the dirt. The silence afterward was total, overwhelming. Katsuro stood over the body, breathing hard, his sword dripping red onto ground that had seen too much blood already. He'd won. The debt was paid. He could go home now, return to his farm and his wife and his daughter, who still believed her father was a good man. He cleaned his blade on Hiraki's clothing, sheathed it, mounted his horse, rode away without looking back. The steward met him at the border of Tsukimori lands. The man's face showed nothing, but he handed Katsuro a cloth to wipe the blood from his hands. "It's done," he asked. Katsuro nodded. "Then Lord Tsukimori will see you now." They rode back to the estate in silence. Katsuro felt nothing. He was empty. A vessel drained of everything except the bare mechanics of breathing and moving and continuing. To exist despite having no particular desire to do so. Lord Tsukimori received him in the same room as before. The old man looked tired, but satisfied. A difficult calculation completed. A problem solved. "Well done," he said. "Hirowaki's death will be reported as falling in single combat over a matter of personal honor. His clan cannot dispute the circumstances without appearing weak. They'll grumble, they'll posture, but they won't act. The war is averted. Your debt is paid." Katsuro waited. Something in Tsukimori's tone suggested the conversation wasn't finished. "There is, however, a complication," the Lord continued. "Hiroaki had a younger brother, Takashi Verli, 20, a hot-headed fool who believes family honor demands vengeance regardless of circumstance. He's issued a counter-challenge. He wants to face the ronin who killed his brother. He wants satisfaction." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Katsuro's feet. "That wasn't part of our agreement," he said. His voice sounded distant, coming from somewhere outside his body. "No," Tsukimori agreed. "It wasn't, but honor is not a contract with precise terms. It's a living thing. It grows. It demands. Takeshi has made his challenge public. If you refuse, you're branded a coward who kills from ambush. Your name becomes worthless. And in case you've forgotten, that name is still connected to your current life, your farm, your family." Katsuro felt cold spreading through his chest. He said, "One death, one man. The debt settled. I said Hirowaki's death would settle the debt between us. I made no promises about what his death might precipitate. That's beyond my control. Takeshi has acted on his own initiative. This is between you and him now. You knew this would happen. It wasn't a question." Tsukimori's expression didn't change. "I suspected it might. Young men are predictable in their passions. But my suspicions are not your concern. Your concern is the challenge that's been issued. Ignore it, and you're marked. Accept it, and you have a chance to end this cleanly. Kill Takeshi, and the Minamata family has no one left to carry vengeance forward. Their uncle will assume leadership, and he's a practical man who prefers prosperity to pride. So now it's 2 deaths. Now it's survival," Tsukimori said quietly. "Yours and your family's. The choice, as always, is yours to make. But understand that refusing has consequences that extend beyond your personal honor." Katsuro closed his eyes, saw his daughter's face, saw his wife's patient smile, saw the farm and the persimmon tree that had never borne fruit when he asked, 3 days. Takeshi's traveling here from the southern estates. He'll arrive, issue his formal challenge, and you'll meet him at a place of his choosing. After that, if you survive, you're free. No more debts, no more obligations. You have my word. The word of a man who'd already proven that words were weapons as sharp as swords. Katsuro spent the next 3 days in a fog of exhaustion and dread. They gave him a room, food he couldn't taste. Seiki drank too much of. The steward brought physicians to treat the cuts and bruises from his fight with Hiroaki, minor injuries. Nothing serious. He'd heal, they said, as if healing was simply a matter of flesh knitting back together. On the 3rd evening, Takeshi arrived. Katsuro watched from a window as the young man rode through the gates. He looked like his brother. Same lean build, same proud carriage, but younger, unfinished. A blade not yet properly tempered by experience. The formal challenge was delivered that night. Same ritual, same careful language. Singo, combat dawn, a clearing in the forest where witnesses could observe but not interfere. The steward brought the message to Katsuro's room. "He's angry," the man said. "Grieving, that makes him dangerous, but it also makes him reckless." "Use that. How many more?" Katsuro asked. "After Takeshi, how many more brothers, cousins, loyal retainers? How many deaths until Anna is satisfied?" The steward had no answer, or perhaps he did, but knew better than to speak it aloud. Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. Katsuro walked to the clearing in the pre-light, escorted by guards who kept their distance. He felt like a ghost, insubstantial, already dead, but somehow still moving. Takeshi was waiting. The young man's face was a mask of controlled fury, grief worn as armor. He didn't speak when Katsuro arrived, didn't offer formal greetings or traditional courtesies, just drew his sword and attacked. The fight was different from the battle with Hiro. Takeshi fought with passion instead of precision, rage instead of calculation. Every cut carried the weight of loss and the heat of vengeance. It made him dangerous in unexpected ways. His attacks were wild, unpredictable, driven by emotion rather than technique. Katsuro couldn't anticipate the patterns because there were no patterns, just fury expressed through steel. They clashed, separated, clashed again. Takeshi screamed his brother's name and threw himself forward in combinations that had no defense except to give ground and wait for an opening. Katsuro was tired, bone-tired, soul-tired. He parried more than he attacked, defended more than he pressed. He didn't want this fight. Didn't want to kill this grieving boy who was dying for family honor. He didn't understand, was being manipulated by older man. But Takeshi gave him no choice. The young man fought like someone who'd already accepted death. He took risks no trained swordsman would take, left openings no skilled fighter would leave. Katsuro took one of those openings. His blade found Takeshi's throat, a clean cut. Quick. The boy fell without a sound. Surprise in his eyes, his blood poured onto winter ground. Katsuro stood over another body, another death added to a count he'd stopped tracking years ago. He felt nothing. He was beyond feeling. Beyond horror or guilt or anything except a distant recognition that he'd become exactly what he'd tried to stop being. The witnesses stepped forward, confirmed the kill, declared the matter settled. Katsuro walked back to the estate alone. Lord Tsukimori was waiting in the same room. Always the same room, as if this was all theater performed on a fixed stage. "It's done," the old lord said. "Both brothers dead. The Minamoto clan's martial line is finished. Their uncle, Ichiro, will take control. He's already sent word that he considers the matter of his nephew's deaths to be closed. Personal honor. Fair combat. No further action required." "So, I'm free," Katsuro said. His voice was flat. "Empty. You're free," Tsukimori confirmed. "The debt is settled. You may return to your farm, your family, your quiet life. You have my gratitude and my promise that we'll never speak again." Katsuro should have felt relief, liberation. Instead, he felt nothing except the vast emptiness where something essential had been carved away. He left that afternoon, took only his sword and the clothes he'd arrived in. The ride back was a blur of motion without meaning. Mountains, valleys, roads he'd walked before but no longer recognized. He reached the farm 3 days later as night was falling. Smoke rose from the chimney. Light glowed through the shutters. His wife would be preparing dinner. His daughter would be practicing her calligraphy or playing with the wooden doll her mother had made. He stood at the edge of the property and couldn't make himself move forward. Couldn't make himself walk through that door and pretend to be the man who'd left. That man was gone. Dead as Hiro. Dead as Takeshi. Buried under actions that couldn't be undone and choices that couldn't be unmade. His wife opened the door, saw him standing there. Her expression shifted through emotions too quick to name. Relief, fear, grief, recognition of something irretrievably lost. She didn't ask where he'd been, didn't ask what he'd done. She just stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, looking at him with eyes that understood what his silence confirmed. "Your daughter has been asking for you," she said finally. "She made you something, a drawing. She wants to show you." Katsuro took a step forward, then another. His feet felt like they belonged to someone else. His hands hung at his sides, useless and empty even though they no longer held a blade. He walked into the house, into warmth and light and the smell of cooking rice. His daughter came running, holding a piece of paper covered in careful brushstrokes. A tree with fruit hanging from its branches. 3 figures holding hands. "Look, Papa," she said. "It's us. And the persimmon tree finally has fruit." Katsuro knelt and pulled her close, held her while she chattered about her drawing and the tree and how she'd been good while he was away. He held her and felt the weight of what he had done settle onto his shoulders like stones. That night, after his daughter was asleep and his wife had stopped pretending to busy herself with evening tasks, they sat together in silence. She poured tea, neither of them drank. "They'll come back," she said finally. Not a question, a statement of fact. Probably the debt wasn't really settled. No, I don't think it ever was. She nodded. She'd known. Of course she'd known. She'd always been smarter than him about the ways powerful men used honor as a weapon. "What will you do?" she asked. "I don't know," but that was a lie. He knew exactly what would happen. Tsukumori would call again. Another threat to the estate, another favor required, another debt that could only be paid in blood. And Katsuro would answer because refusing meant consequences for people who didn't deserve them. The cycle would continue until one of 2 things happened. Either someone finally killed him, or Tsukimori died and someone else inherited the leverage. Either way, the quiet life was over, the farmer was gone. Only the weapon remained, ready to be wielded by whoever understood how to manipulate honor into obedience. 2 weeks passed. Spring began its slow approach. The persimmon tree showed no signs of budding. The letter arrived on a morning that felt exactly like the morning when the first letter had come. Same messenger. Same boy who wouldn't meet his eyes. Same heavy paper with a seal, the color of old blood. Katsuro's wife saw it and said nothing. She just gathered their daughter and took her to visit neighbors, leaving him alone with paper and choices that weren't really choices. He opened it. The message was different this time. Longer, more detailed, but the essence was the same. Lord Tsukimori required assistance. A matter had arisen, bandits threatening trade routes, or perhaps a rival lord making claims on disputed territory. The details didn't matter. Only the conclusion. Only the debt being called in again. But this time, there was something new. A single line added at the end in different handwriting. Your family remains safe only so long as you remain useful. Consider this truth carefully. Katsuro burned the letter, packed his sword, told his wife he'd return when he could, which they both knew meant never in any way that mattered. He kissed his daughter goodbye. She asked him to bring her something from his travels, something special. He promised he would, and watched her smile as if promises still meant something. The road north had become familiar now. Hateful in its familiarity, each step a repetition of previous steps, each day a mirror of days before. The mountains didn't change. The forests didn't care. Only the man walking through them was different each time, carved away piece by piece until nothing remained except the part that knew how to kill when commanded. He reached the estate, was received by the same steward in the same manner, was led to the same room where Lord Tsukimori waited with another impossible request dressed as honorable necessity. But this time Katsuro didn't listen to the details, didn't care about the justifications or explanations. He just nodded when the old lord finished speaking, accepted the assignment, and prepared to do what was required. He'd learned the truth of debt in feudal Japan. It was never about the original favor, never about balancing scales or settling accounts. Debt was a chain forged link by link, extending forward into a future that had no end. Every payment made created the need for another payment. Every life taken proved you were capable of taking more. Honor wasn't a shield. It was a trap. A beautiful, carefully constructed trap that caught men like him and held them until they forgot there had ever been anything else. He completed the assignment, killed who he was told to kill, returned to receive Tsukimori's approval, and another promise that this time, surely this time, the debt was settled. He didn't believe it. Neither did the old lord. They both understood the truth that lived beneath the lies they told themselves. Katsuro went back to the farm, held his daughter, worked the soil, waited for the next letter that would inevitably arrive. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The persimmon tree finally bloomed, white flowers that fell like snow onto ground that would never produce fruit. His wife stopped asking when he left and where he went. His daughter stopped drawing pictures of the family together. They all learned to live in the spaces between summons, to exist in the gaps where pretending was still possible. 3 more times the letter came. 3 more times Katsura walked north into mountains that knew his footsteps. 3 more men died because honor demanded it and debt required it, and powerful men needed tools willing to kill without question. He stopped counting, stopped remembering names, became the thing he'd feared becoming, not suddenly but gradually, one choice at a time, one death at a time, one letter at a time. Lord Tsukimori died in his sleep on a winter night when snow fell like judgment. Katsuro learned about it from a traveler passing through the village. The old lord's nephew Kazuki had assumed control of the estate. The transition had been peaceful. For a week, Katsuro allowed himself to hope. Perhaps with Tsukimori dead, the cycle would break. Perhaps the debt would die with the man who'd first claimed it. Then another letter arrived. Different seal. Same way Kazuki wrote that he'd found his uncle's records. Detailed accounts of favors granted and debts owed. Your name appears frequently, the letter said. My uncle valued your reliability. I hope to maintain that relationship. There are matters requiring someone of your particular skills. Please present yourself at your earliest convenience. Katsuro read the letter 3 times. Then he walked to the persimmon tree, looked up at branches that would never bear fruit no matter how long they lived or how carefully they were tended. He understood finally, completely, the debt would never end because it was never meant to end. It would pass from hand to hand, lord to heir, generation to generation. He would serve until he died or became too old to be useful. Then perhaps they'd come for his daughter. Find some way to bind her to obligations inherited through blood and honor. That night, he made his decision. He left before dawn while his family slept. Took his sword and enough supplies for a long journey. Left a letter that explained nothing because there was nothing that could be explained. Just apologies and lies dressed as love. He walked roads he'd never traveled. Passed through territories where his name meant nothing. Became truly ronin, masterless, purposeless, free in the way that men are free when they've cut away everything that gave them meaning. He didn't go back. Not to the farm. Not to Tsukimori lands. Not to any place where debt could find him. Years passed. His sword rusted. His skills faded. He worked when work was available. Starved when it wasn't. Became the thing he'd feared more than death. Nothing. No one. A man who'd traded honor for survival and found that survival without honor was just slow dying. Sometimes he thought about his daughter, wondered if she still drew pictures. If the persimmon tree finally bore fruit after he left, if his wife told her the truth about her father, or if she kept the lie alive to protect something that didn't deserve protection. He died alone in a village whose name he never learned. Fever took him during a harsh winter. No one knew his name. No one cared about debts he'd carried or lives he'd taken or choices he'd made when he still believed choices mattered. They burned his body with the other anonymous dead. Scattered ashes on ground that would grow rice come spring, indifferent to whose bones fed its roots. The debt was finally paid. Not because someone had declared it settled, not because Anna had been satisfied or accounts balanced, but because there was nothing left to take. No life to claim, no leverage to exploit, no tool to wield. In feudal Japan, a debt of honor is never paid with silver. Sometimes it's never paid at all. Sometimes it just keeps taken until there's nothing left to give. And then it moves on to the next man who makes the mistake of believing that honor and obligation and duty mean anything except chains. The persimmon tree lived for 20 more years. It never bore fruit. Eventually, someone cut it down to make room for something more useful. Something that would produce instead of just standing there beautiful and barren, waiting for a harvest that would never come.